Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're getting dramatic. We're going to be exploring the world of realism in theater.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, right? I've always been so curious about, why some plays just feel so real. You know what I mean? Like they just hit you right in the feels.
Totally.
So today we'll be finding out how this whole realism thing in theater actually started and all the tricks playwrights and actors use to make their performances so real. What do you say? Ready to dive in?
Let's do it. It really is amazing how realism changed the game in theater.
Okay, so tell me about that. How did things work before realism?
Okay, so just imagine this. Every play had a happy ending.
Wait, really? Like, no drama, just happily ever after?
Pretty much.
That's wild. So how did we go from all sunshine and roses to plays that leave you, questioning everything?
Well, we've got to go back to the early 1800s. Back then, it was all about romanticism. Plays were full of big emotions, grand gestures.
Okay, so super dramatic.
Exactly. It was all very focused on, the soul and its struggles. Almost like an escape from reality, I guess.
Okay, so I can see how that would be appealing back then.
For sure. But then we get to the Victorian era with its super strict morals, and then the Industrial Revolution happened. All that romanticized stuff just didn't really fit anymore.
Yeah, real life was getting a lot more complicated.
Exactly. Plus, on top of that, you've got all these revolutionary thinkers like Comte, Darwin, and Nietzsche. Comte was all about cause and effect. Darwin basically rocked everyone's world with evolution.
Oh yeah, I can imagine how that would shake things up.
Totally. And then you have Nietzsche, who basically declared that God is dead. So yeah, things were changing. Imagine living in a time where all these scientific and philosophical ideas were just turning everything upside down. I'm not surprised that artists felt they needed to find a new way to portray life.
Yeah, I bet. So you're saying that theater started to reflect all of these big changes.
Exactly. And that's really where this new kind of theater came in that aimed to reflect reality. That's how we got realism.
Okay, so that's where we start getting plays that feel more like real life. But how did playwrights actually make that happen? Did they completely ditch all the fancy stuff from the Romanticism era?
Well, not completely. There was this sort of in-between stage. It was called the well-made play.
Okay, what's a well-made play?
It was this idea that came from a playwright named Eugene Scrab. He was all about structure. You can think about it kind of like a detective novel. You've got all the clues laid out, and then the hero solves the mystery at the end.
Okay, so every piece of the plot fits together perfectly.
Exactly. So it's still structured, but at least it's closer to reality than those happily ever after plays we talked about.
Okay, true.
Right? But even well-made plays had their limitations.
I could imagine.
I mean, real life isn't always so neat and tidy, right? Some people felt like the structure was just too simple. They wanted something that really showed the messiness of human existence. And that's how we got to an even more extreme form of realism. Naturalism.
Naturalism. Okay, so I've definitely heard that term before. What does it actually mean when we're talking about theater?
Basically, naturalism was like holding a mirror up to society, warts and all. No more sugarcoating.
Whoa, so it was like getting real. Literally.
Yeah, basically. Playwrights like Émile Zola were all about this. They dove headfirst into all these controversial topics like you wouldn't believe. They were writing plays with open endings that would leave audiences with all these questions swirling in their heads, and they used everyday language.
Wow. It sounds intense.
It was. These plays tackled real-world issues head-on. Divorce, disease, class struggles, all the stuff that people were dealing with in real life.
So it's clear that theater was changing big time. But was it just about reflecting reality, or did these playwrights have a bigger goal?
That's a good question. I think naturalism really kicked off this debate. Can art be a tool for social change? And should it be?
That's a good question, and it's one we're still asking today, right?
Absolutely. So who were some of these groundbreaking playwrights, the ones who really brought these raw, real stories to the stage?
Yeah, I want names.
Okay, well, there was this guy, Alexandre Dumas, known for his super sharp dialogue that exposed all the hypocrisy in society.
Oh, I bet people loved that.
They did not. But his plays forced people to confront some uncomfortable truths.
It sounds like realism was ruffling feathers both on stage and off.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So what about you? Have you seen or read any plays that you think really captured the spirit of realism?
That's a good question. Well, of course, there's Death of a Salesman, which I think really captures the struggles of the American dream, and Master Harold and the Boys, which takes a powerful look at the impact of apartheid. Have you seen those? It's really something else to see these characters dealing with such real-world problems right there on stage.
Oh, absolutely. And there are so many others, like Scener in Die Suburbs, which explores what happens when a young man can see the future. and look back in anger, which is a powerful portrayal of working class disillusionment. It's definitely different from those escapist plays we talked about earlier.
For sure. Okay, so we've got these powerful plays reflecting real life, but how did the actual staging and acting change to make those stories come alive?
That's where it gets really interesting. Think about what you typically see when you go to a play today. You've got realistic sets, detailed props, lighting that creates a certain mood. All of that was part of this shift towards realism.
So it was about making the whole experience feel real, not just the story itself.
Right. They started using box sets that were designed to look like actual rooms. They had furniture and all these realistic props. And then electric lighting came along, and suddenly playwrights could control the mood and atmosphere in a whole new way.
Oh, wow, yeah. That's a game changer.
Oh, and there's also the fourth wall, that invisible barrier between the actors and the audience. It really makes you feel like you're peeking into a real-life scene.
Oh, yeah. Like we're flies on the wall watching these private moments.
Yes, exactly. And of course, the acting style had to change too. Those big pronouncements and dramatic gestures from the Romantic era just wouldn't work anymore. Actors started focusing on these subtle movements, believable speech patterns. They were trying to convey those emotions that simmer beneath the surface, you know?
It's all about those little details that really draw you in and make you believe in the characters.
Precisely. There was this guy, the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, who was a real pioneer in this new style of directing. He was so meticulous, like obsessed with historical accuracy.
No detail was too small.
Exactly. He insisted on longer rehearsals so actors could really delve into their roles, and he believed that even the smallest parts deserved attention. It really created this immersive experience for the audience.
He sounds like the ultimate perfectionist.
He kind of was, and it really makes you appreciate how all these innovations have shaped how we experience theater today.
Totally. Can you imagine a production with no director? It would be chaos.
I know, right? But speaking of important figures and realist acting, we need to talk about Konstantin Stanislavski.
Oh, yes. Stanislavski. Wasn't he the guy who developed the system?
Yes, he really revolutionized the way actors approach their craft. He was actually inspired by the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, but he took things even further.
So what was the system all about?
Well, he was an actor himself, and he was frustrated with how artificial a lot of acting felt.
Yeah, I get that.
So he created this system to help actors achieve a level of truth and authenticity that had never been seen before.
Okay, I love that. But how does an actor actually do that? The system sounds great, but can you really step into another person's mind like that?
Okay, well, so that's the genius of Stanislavski. He broke the whole process down into a set of techniques that actors could use. One of the key elements is the magic if. It basically encourages the actor to really immerse themselves in the character's shoes, to ask themselves, what would I do if I were in this situation?
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you make that believable? Like, how do you actually become that character?
Well, that's where the idea given circumstances comes in. Stanislavski believed that actors need to consider every single detail that shapes the scene, the time period, the location, the relationships between the characters, even things like props and costumes. It all contributes to the context of the scene and informs how the character behaves.
So you're basically building this whole world around the character.
Exactly. And once you've got that foundation, then you can start to think about the character's objectives. What do they want to achieve in the scene? What are their obstacles? It's almost like a detective piecing together clues to figure out why a character acts the way they do.
So the system combines this really detailed analysis with tapping into the actor's own emotions and experiences.
You got it. That's how you create a truly believable performance. And to help actors stay present and focused in the moment, Stanislavski introduced the concept of circles of attention.
Okay, what are those?
Basically, the actor should focus all of their energy on the immediate action happening in the scene and the interactions with other characters. They have to block out the audience and all their anxieties.
So it's like a form of meditation.
Exactly. You have to be fully present in the world of the play. And the amazing thing is that the system is still used today by actors all over the world, which just shows you how relevant it is, even over a century later.
It really is amazing how something developed so long ago is still so influential today. But, the world has changed a lot since Stanislavski's time. Did realism fade away as we moved into the 20th century?
Oh, not at all. Realism is kind of like a chameleon. It adapts and evolves. In the mid-20th century, we actually see a resurgence of realism, but this time it's mixed with a sense of disillusionment.
Oh, interesting. That makes sense after World War II.
Exactly. So it was a darker, maybe grittier kind of realism.
Got it. So what was this new kind of realism called?
It was called New Realism. It still focused on portraying real life, but it often blended in elements from other movements like symbolism and expressionism. So it became more layered and complex.
So basically, realism was just absorbing new ideas and reflecting the changing world.
Exactly. And even the physical spaces where plays were performed started to change. The traditional proscenium arch stage, that one that looks like a picture frame, started to give way to things like thrust stages and open stages, which allowed for more creative staging.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like theater itself was breaking free from all those old constraints.
Yes, exactly. And all of those innovations have continued to shape how theater is done today, blurring those lines between the stage and the audience.
So it creates a more immersive experience.
Exactly. Wow, we've covered so much already, from those early structured plays to the groundbreaking techniques of Stanislavski. It's incredible how much realism has changed the world of theater.
It really is. But we're not done yet, are we?
Nope. We've got lots more to explore. In part 2, we'll delve deeper into how realism shows up in modern theater. We'll look at specific plays and playwrights and get into even more detail about those realist acting techniques.
Okay, you got me hooked. Can't wait to learn more. We'll be back soon with part 2, so don't go anywhere. Okay, so we're back and ready to keep digging into this whole realism thing. It's been fascinating to see how this movement has changed over time. But is realism still even a thing? Like, is it just a museum piece now, or is it still relevant today?
Oh, realism is definitely not stuck in the past. It's still very much alive and kicking and shaping the plays we see today.
So it's not just a history lesson.
Nope. And that's what makes it so interesting, I think. It's not like a rigid set of rules. It's more of a constantly evolving approach to telling stories.
Oh, I like that. So it's like it adapts to reflect the world around us?
Exactly. And to really see how this works, I think it would be helpful to look at some specific plays and playwrights that have really left their mark on modern realism.
Okay, yeah, let's get into specifics. Who should we be checking out?
Well, we can't talk about realism without mentioning some of the deniants who really laid the foundation, like Henrik Ibsen, for example. He's often called the father of modern drama.
Oh, yeah, I've heard the name, but honestly, I don't know much about his work. What made him so groundbreaking?
He was really good at peeling back the layers of society and exposing all the hypocrisy underneath. He wasn't afraid to tackle controversial topics.
So he was kind of like a truth teller.
Exactly. He wrote about women's roles in society, society expectations, secrets, the consequences of repression. His plays really stirred things up back in his day.
Yeah, I bet. And they still make us think today.
Absolutely. So we talked about those well-made plays earlier. Did Ibsen follow those rules, or was he doing something different?
Yeah, good question.
Well, Ibsen definitely pushed the boundaries of that whole well-made play structure. He took those elements of realism, like focusing on everyday life and the complexities of relationships, but then he added this layer of psychological depth that was totally new.
Okay, interesting. Can you give me an example? Like, which one of his plays really shows that?
Well, take A Doll's House, for example. It's a story about this woman who seems to have it all, a loving husband, beautiful children, comfortable life, but she's trapped. Society expects her to just be a wife and mother, nothing more.
Wow. Yeah, I can see why that would be a big deal back then.
Oh, it was. It was totally scandalous. But it still speaks to audiences today.
So Ibsen definitely made an impact. But what about other playwrights? Who else was pushing the boundaries of realism?
Well, there's Anton Chekhov. He was a master at capturing those small, everyday moments that reveal so much about human nature.
So not big dramatic stuff, but those subtle interactions that make up real life.
Exactly. His characters are often stuck in their circumstances. They want more out of life, but they struggle to break free. And he doesn't do this with big speeches or anything. It's all about the pauses, the silences, the things that aren't said.
So it's like those moments when you can feel the tension in a room, even though no one's saying anything?
Yes, precisely. Chekhov was such a keen observer of people, and he brought that sensitivity to his writing. His characters feel so real, like you're watching real people on stage.
That's so cool. It seems like it would be really hard to capture those kinds of subtle moments.
It definitely takes skill. So are you familiar with any of Chekhov's plays?
I think I've heard of The Seagull.
Oh yeah, that's a classic one. It explores unrequited love, artistic ambition, and that search for meaning in life. Uncle Vanya is another good one. It deals with disillusionment and that feeling of being stuck in a rut.
And these plays are still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. They're always being revived and reinterpreted, and they always seem to resonate with audiences, no matter when or where they're performed.
That's amazing. It seems like Chekhov really tacked into something universal about the human experience.
I think so, too. So we've talked about Ibsen and Chekhov. Who else should we add to our list of realist playwrights?
Yeah, who else is there?
Well, if we're talking about shaking things up, we can't forget George Bernard Shaw.
Okay, I know the name. Fill me in.
He was so sharp and witty. He really used that to tackle social and political issues.
So he wasn't just reflecting reality. He was using realism to challenge it.
Exactly. His plays are full of clever dialogue and thought-provoking debates that really really make you question things.
So they're entertaining, but they also have a message.
Exactly. For example, there's Pygmalion, which explores class distinctions and how language can be so powerful. You might know it better as the musical My Fair Lady.
Wait, really? My Fair Lady is based on a Shaw play. I had no idea.
It is. And then there's Major Barbara, which deals with morality and social responsibility. It asks some tough questions about whether it's even possible to do good in a world full of injustice.
So realism wasn't just about showing everyday life. It was also about using theater as a platform for social commentary.
Exactly. And as we move into more contemporary times, you see playwrights like David Mamet and Reza Dawet carrying that torch of realism, but they bring their own unique perspectives.
Okay, so what about Mamet? I've heard his name, but I'm not really familiar with his work. What's his style?
Mamet's known for his dialogue. It's so sharp and cutting, and he really explores power dynamics. He's not afraid to show the darker side of human nature.
So not exactly lighthearted comedies.
Not really. His characters are often ambitious and manipulative. They're willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want.
Sounds intense. So which of his plays are the most well-known?
Well, there's Glenberry Glen Ross, which takes a pretty brutal look at the world of real estate.
Oof, I can imagine.
And then there's Oleana, which explores sexual harassment and power dynamics between a professor and a student.
Wow, yeah, that's a play that would definitely spark some conversations.
Oh, for sure. It makes you think about different perspectives and how easily communication can break down.
Yeah, sadly, those themes are still really relevant today.
They are. Okay, so we've got Mamet exploring the dark side. What about Reza Dawet? You mentioned her earlier.
Yeah. What kind of stories did she tell?
Her work is really fascinating. She's South African, and her plays often explore the human psyche and family relationships and the impact of past traumas.
So it's like she's exploring the inner world as much as the outer world.
Yes, exactly. One of her most well-known plays is African Gothic. We touched on it a little bit earlier. It's about this family haunted by their secrets and the weight of history.
Wow, it sounds heavy.
It is. It's a powerful exploration of how the past can shape the present.
So it seems like these playwrights we've been talking about, from Ibsen and Mamet to Dawet, they're all connected by this commitment to showing human experience in all its complexity.
That's a really good point. Realism isn't just about showing what life looks like on the surface. It's about digging deeper and exploring what's going on inside these characters.
Yeah, it's about capturing the full spectrum of human experience, the good, the bad, and everything in between.
Exactly. And as we've seen, realism isn't just stuck in the past. It's still a vital and evolving force in theater today. It's really amazing how this approach to storytelling can connect with us on such a deep level.
It is. Okay, so we've talked about the playwrights, but what about the actors? The people who actually have to bring these characters to life on stage. It seems like it would take a special kind of skill to embody these roles authentically.
You're so right. And this is where Stanislavski and the system come back in. His techniques are so helpful for actors who are tackling these kinds of roles.
Right, the system. We talked about it a bit earlier, but can you remind me how it actually works in practice?
Sure. So remember the magic if. It's all about putting yourself in the character's shoes, asking yourself, what would I do if I were in this situation?
Right. So it's about empathy, really trying to understand the character from the inside out.
Yes. And to do that well, actors need to consider those given circumstances we talked about. They have to build this detailed backstory for the character, understand their relationships, their environment, their goals, their obstacles.
So it's like they have to create a whole world for the character to live in.
Exactly. It's like being a detective gathering clues. And then once you've got that foundation, you can start to think about the character's objectives. What do they want to achieve? How do they go about getting it? What's standing in their way?
It sounds like a lot of work goes into crafting a believable performance.
It does, but it's not just about analysis. It's also about using your own emotions and experiences to connect with the character.
So you need both your head and your heart.
Exactly. Stanislavski believed actors should draw on their own memories and feelings. And then, of course, there are the circles of attention.
Right, those help the actor stay focused.
Yes. It's about concentrating on what's happening in the scene right now, blocking out all distractions.
Like a form of meditation.
It is. You have to be totally present in that moment. And that's what makes realist acting so powerful. It draws you in because it feels so authentic. Like you're watching real life unfold.
Yeah, it's like we're right there with them.
Exactly. Now, there's one more important element of realist acting that we need to talk about. Subtext.
Oh, subtext. What's that?
Well, in real life, we don't always say exactly what we're thinking or feeling, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's always stuff going on beneath the surface.
And that's what subtext is all about. Actors have to be able to communicate those unspoken layers of meaning.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Right. It's about those subtle cues that reveal what's really going on inside. Things like gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, even silences.
So what's not being said is just as important as what is being said.
Exactly. Realist actors have to be masters of subtext.
Wow. It's amazing how much goes into creating a truly realistic performance.
It really is. It's like creating a whole world, both internally and externally.
As we've been talking, I've been thinking about how these same principles of realism show up in so many other forms of storytelling.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, like in books, movies, even visual art, it's like this focus on authenticity and detail. Is that a coincidence, or is there something more to it?
I think you're definitely onto something. Those core elements of realism have had a huge influence on art in general.
So it's bigger than just theater.
It is. Think about the rise of the novel. It was all about creating these realistic characters and settings, or cinema verite in filmmaking. It was about capturing the rawness of real life.
And now there are all these documentary-style TV shows that blur the lines between fiction and reality.
Exactly. And even in visual art, there were movements like Impressionism and social realism that tried to capture the world as it was.
Wow. So realism has had this ripple effect across all these different art forms.
It really has. It's about connecting with us on a deep human level.
Okay, so we've talked about how realism has shaped theater, acting, and even other kinds of art. But we're not done yet, right?
Nope, we've got one more part to go. In part 3, we'll take a step back and look at a bigger picture. We'll explore the relationship between realism and truth. We'll see how realism continues to evolve in the 21st century. And we'll think about its lasting impact on how we understand ourselves and the world.
Okay. Bring on the big questions. We'll be back soon for the final part of our realism deep dive, so stay tuned. Okay, so we're back for the final act of our realism deep dive. It's been quite a journey. I feel like we've covered so much ground already, from the history of the movement to all those amazing techniques actors use.
It really has been, but there's still so much more to unpack. Now we can finally tackle some of those bigger questions, the ones that realism really makes us think about.
All right, bring it on. Let's get philosophical. What's the first big question we need to address?
Well, I think after all this talk about realism, we have to ask, why are we so drawn to it? What is it about seeing our own lives reflected back at us that's so captivating?
That's a good question. And it's not always pretty, right? So why do we keep coming back for more?
Well, maybe it's that sense of recognition, that feeling that we're not alone in all of this, in the struggles and the joys and all the messy stuff in between.
Yeah, like seeing someone else going through the same things you are. It's like, hey, I'm not the only one who feels this way.
Exactly. It can be so validating to see your own experiences mirrored on stage, even the ones that aren't so glamorous.
It's like a reminder that we're all human. We all mess up sometimes.
Right. But, realism doesn't just make us feel seen. It can also challenge us, force us to confront things about ourselves and the world that maybe we'd rather ignore.
So it's not just about comfort. It's about pushing us to think critically.
Exactly. Realism can be a real catalyst for change. It encourages us to question things, to see things from different perspectives.
Maybe even change our minds about things.
Right. And by seeing the lives of others portrayed so realistically on stage, maybe we can start to close those gaps that separate us, between different social classes and cultures and experiences.
Yeah, totally. Like you can step into someone else's shoes for a little while.
Exactly. It can foster empathy and understanding.
That's powerful. Okay, so realism can make us feel seen. It can challenge us. And it can help us connect with each other. But, there's this word that keeps coming up, and I feel like we've been dancing around it a little bit.
Oh, you mean truth?
Yes, truth. We talk about realism being about authenticity, about portraying life as it really is, but can any art form ever really capture the full complexity of reality?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's a tricky one. You're right. There's always some level of interpretation.
So is it all just a lie then?
No, not at all. I think what realism does is it uses the tools of art to create a sense of truth, something that resonates with the audience on a deeper level.
Okay, so it's not about replicating reality exactly. It's more about capturing the essence of it.
Right, and I think that's why there are so many different approaches to realism. There's no one right way to do it. It's a whole spectrum.
That makes it, and that's probably why realism has been able to adapt and change over time too.
For sure. I mean, think about how much the world has changed, even in the last few decades. But realism has kept pace. It's constantly reflecting more realities.
So where do you think it's heading? What's next for realism in the 21st century?
Well, I think it will definitely keep grappling with all the complexities of our modern world. It's a world that's so interconnected and tech-driven.
So maybe we'll start seeing plays that explore the impact of social media or AI or virtual reality, all those things that blur the lines between what's real and what's not.
Yes, exactly. I also think we'll see realism continuing to tackle all those big issues that we're facing. Things like climate change, inequality, political divides.
Yeah, and I think there's a real need for stories that represent more diverse voices and experiences.
Absolutely. I think we'll see a greater emphasis on inclusive realism, and that's a good thing.
It is. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that realism at its core is about connection. It's about seeing ourselves reflected in the stories we encounter, and it's about recognizing our shared humanity.
Beautifully said. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into realism. What a journey it's been.
I agree. It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating world with you and with all our listeners.
And to everyone listening, we hope you've enjoyed it too. We encourage you to check out some of the plays and playwrights we've talked about and to see how elements of realism pop up in other areas of art. But most importantly, we hope this deep dive is giving you some food for thought. Until next time, keep those curtains rising.